welcome to Redemptive Psych. My name is John Bodine, and today we're doing our first video on a sort of a worldview introduction to making the pathway and building out the set of goals and values that is going to dictate our conversation in these videos on personality type, on self-development, on spiritual transformation. But first, in these first couple videos, we're going to lay out a sort of a philosophical and cultural context to address certain issues that people face. This first video is on the Christian community, on Christian culture, and in subsequent videos we'll talk about the opposite, about the secular culture. And between these two extremes, at the very extreme of Christian culture lies some real issues, and not that Christ has issues, but that our enculturation and use of Christian principles at times can do damage, and can do a lot of damage. And this video is about the main damage that's related to personal understanding and then self-development. So this video is about the fear of oneself that Christian communities have created and have instilled. And the reality behind that is, I don't believe that this fear was ever intended. I don't believe that it's a good thing. I don't believe that it's actually aligned with how a Christian, or how really anyone, is called to act and called to believe and called to think. As I was growing up, I grew up in the church and around a lot of Christians, and I've been around a lot of different religious communities, mostly Christian, throughout my life. And I remember a number of occasions when I was entering my teen years and then my adult years where I would talk to someone, when I was younger, maybe more so at church, or older, maybe more so at school, or just people that you meet in the community, and trying to connect with a person and trying to relate of struggles I was having, or pain, or obstacles, or depression, or anxiety, or any of these things that most of us deal with. Not that I was laying it all out there, but just sort of hinting at, I'm kind of having a rough time with this or that, or I'm in a harder period of my life. And I remember the faces of many of these people that I would interact with or talk to and try and connect with. And the image that sticks the most in my mind is a pair of blank eyes looking back at me that basically said, I have no idea what you're talking about. I can't relate. And further than that, there was a redirection of the communication I was giving towards them. And the message I received back is, what's wrong with you? And this led me to understand that beneath the veneer of many Christian communities is really an unacceptance of personal differences. And of course, when we don't accept something and we fear something and we don't like something, it's usually because we don't understand it, number one. So I remember the feeling of interacting with these people, and not only feeling not understood, and like my communication wasn't resonating, and what I was sharing couldn't be related to at all. I actually felt judged for having any inner conflict at all. And I'm curious if any of you have experienced similar things with, particularly with people in Christian community, that there's this distance that they create from themselves, and they separate themselves from their inner thoughts and feelings because they believe that there's an image, an idea of what a Christian looks like, that they can only associate with that image, and anything else is bad sort, is worthy of condemnation. And even though it's hard to spot, if you go to any number of Christian communities, whether a Sunday school, a youth group, a church, or a school, perhaps, there is a cheeriness and a politeness that's often there. But if you stay there long enough, especially if you're someone who deals with some real human things, you will probably find, at least in one or more of those communities, that there's not really a tolerance or a space or a real compassion for you. It's not that people don't love you or want you to get better or deal with your problems. It's more that they have distanced themselves from their own inner worlds, that they really believe that the internal exploration is sinful. And this leads to the top of the whiteboard here, which is one of the most profound quotes I've ever read from Carl Jung, that talks about this: we cannot change anything unless we accept it. Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses. And this attitude of severing our relationship with our inner worlds, with our feelings, with our thoughts, with images, with any kind of inner experience, separating ourselves from that and pushing that away because it doesn't match up with the image, the ideal, the expectation that we feel we are obligated to abide by. It doesn't match up with that. And so as we distance ourselves from it, we reject it and we push it down, and it becomes something repressed and something that takes on more dark characteristics than it was meant to. In the same way that leaving a lid on a pressure cooker for too long is going to create more turbulence. A lot of these Christians who live under this veneer, who exhibit a cheery kind of shallow happiness, but don't really have any real self-awareness, they will become really confused when life gets challenging and their own inner world starts to pull on them and starts to not make sense. And it just feels like, God's testing me, or maybe I'm doing something wrong. And this inner conflict is almost always redirected towards an attitude of right or wrong, of condemnation, of you're doing something wrong. And the purpose of these videos and this channel is to use the power of personality psychology and tools of self-awareness, armed with a belief that God is real, that He is relevant, that He is most curious about us. Armed with that those tools and that knowledge can free a lot of these people from really the shackles of feeling like they cannot explore themselves. So out of this individual fear of not being able to explore ourselves, that leads to a communal fear of conformity. Over 90% of Christian communities I've been around are very uncomfortable around people who are different, around personalities that are not as agreeable, that are not as socially conscious, that are not as conformist. And this conformity leads to a false belief that Christianity and Christians are going to look the same and be the same and act the same. And nothing could be further from the truth, except for the fact that through the process of transformation and our renewed souls, there will be a shared power and a shared light there with God. But other than that, there's a huge variety to human beings, a huge variety to how we express ourselves. And we have to be very careful that cultural Christianity, as the phrase suggests, often absorbs beliefs and values from the culture, or pushes so hard against the culture, against the values of the culture of the time, that they actually miss the middle truth, the middle path, so to speak. And through this, attitudes develop that end up rejecting people who are, Christians, but maybe a little more strange or more willing to share what they think, and maybe what they think is not what everyone else thinks. And the attitude that most human beings experience is similar to a lot of these Christian communities, that anyone who's different is rejectable. It's sort of a xenophobia, but about behavior. Anyone who behaves differently is not one of us, right? And the assumption with people who have inner conflict is that they are not walking with God. Maybe you share something about your life, and the first question you get is, how is your prayer life? Or how is your heart? And while these questions are well intended and at times appropriate, they really reveal the ignorance of personal differences. And that inner conflict is not associated always with doing something wrong. Instead of this go-to safe question of, what are you doing wrong? That's what the implication is when people ask, how's your prayer life or how's your heart? After you share something that's difficult, the implication there is condemnation. That the person sharing that question, how is the state of your spiritual life, is missing all of the vulnerability that a person shares, and missing all the curiosity of exploring what makes this person go. Why are they entangled in this? And instead defaulting to really a condemnatory question that is accusatory, which is, what are you doing wrong in your walk, right? And this attitude that's always externalized of, if something's in conflict with yourself, or if you aren't someone who mirrors every other Christian, the attitude there is one of fear and rejection. Of course, this fear and rejection actually starts with ourselves. As we mentioned earlier, our fear, many Christians fear going inside of themselves, going within, meditating on their feelings, on their thoughts, on their images, on all kinds of things that their internal life has. They push it all the way because they are so afraid to go into that. And that's basically the effect that caution tape has on a crime scene of it's an indication that I fear that, I push that away, I cannot go in there. Because of this, really the Christian conformity, the issues with Christian conformity and rejection stem from the self. We fear and reject ourselves because we believe that within us is filled with things that are unacceptable. And we don't believe, many people don't believe that God is actually curious enough to explore that with us. And again, that's a big part of what this content is going to be about, because as you begin to learn, or maybe you already have learned, and as I've learned about my own personality and about other people's personality, you start to see where there's natural obstacles that are there. One type is going to have a much deeper inclination for fear of the future, for fear of consequences, than other types are going to have a much bigger fear of not being liked, or not being trusted, or not having choice, or not having freedom. And it's not that all people don't struggle with similar things. That is true to some extent. But as we begin to understand ourselves, understand our tendencies, we begin to relax a little. That, it's normal for me to struggle with not trusting people, or feeling like I can't communicate myself, or feeling like no one thinks well of me, right? And instead of this, we'll get to that in a moment. I want to go to the source first. The source of our inner rejection, as I've kind of been implying here, is this belief that I am bad, which is very curious, because the idea of a Christian is someone who has and is being transformed inside out. And the best book I've ever read on fixing this belief was given to me by a mentor and a friend. It's on that top little circle there. One of John Eldredge's books, Waking the Dead. And in that book, he makes the argument, or really he advocates for a new perspective, that at the moment of spiritual transformation with God, your nature deep within you starts to shift, and it moves from being, fleshy and sinful, to actually fundamentally being something good. And Christians have not embraced that. Most Christians that I know have not embraced that. They still believe that they're wretched and bad and shameful and gross and unacceptable. And until they shift their belief from I am bad to maybe my inner nature has become good, not that you go run rampant with that. We still need to walk carefully and intentionally and hopefully with God still after we've been transformed. But the reality is, as Eldredge cites this verse in Ezekiel, talking about, I will remove the heart of stone, removing your old nature, and will give you a beating, living heart of flesh that's real and alive and good. So, like I said, until this belief changes, we are entrapped by this conformity, by this fear of ourselves, by this self-rejection, self-loathing, and then that moves to others who don't fit in, who don't say the right things, who share some struggles in their life. There's often a condemnation there, right? So the process to that, part of the process to that is knowledge about individual differences. And until you understand who and what you are and how you are different from other people, you are going to hold everyone to the same standard of conformity of behavior as the image in your mind possesses you to hold. Meaning that if you lack the self-knowledge and you lack the understanding of how and why other people are different, then your expectation of others is going to be a cookie-cutter expectation where no one is allowed to be or look different than your image of Jesus, basically. So instead of condemnation, why not curiosity? And this is, on the bottom here, is a version of Jung's quote that integrates a relationship with God into it. And that is my own quote: God cannot transform us unless we allow him to love all of us. There's an idea that because we think we're bad, that God hates parts of ourselves, that we hate parts of ourselves. And I don't think anything could be further from the truth. I think he's so fascinated by us. He wants to explore every inch of our mind, every inch of our spirit, every inch of the images and the thoughts and the feelings that come. And that exploration is totally necessary for the integration of the different human parts. And really a path of courage, a testing of faith, if you will, to walk with God into these depths, not condemning, not judging, not pushing away either, just letting it come, walking through it. Because ultimately, curiosity is a healing force. And it's very similar to that verse in Matthew, where Jesus talks about, unless you become like a child, unless you become curious and innocent like a child, you will not enter the kingdom of God. Meaning that it's okay to be curious and to let go of the fear, because having a pure intention and being curious and bringing God with you, there's nowhere you can go that good things won't come of it if you can do those three things. And that is never going to be more necessary than in the exploration of yourself. And if you can realize that we cannot change our inner worlds until we accept them, until we allow God's love to be in us truly, and that nothing has to be rejected or condemned, but to be understood and to be walked through. And then, at that point, our natures can become more unified, more integrated, more understood. As I see it, most Christians today in our culture have this thick layer of concrete blocking the pathway down into their hearts because they're so afraid of it. They're so afraid of what they might find. And they're so afraid that self-exploration is the same as exploring sin or inviting sin. I heard this very famous pastor once say that, basically make the point that you shouldn't be alone because you can't trust yourself with whatever is going to come up. I say absolutely not. How are you to know yourself? to explore the creation that you are unless you spend some time alone, unless you explore some of your depths, as scary as that may seem. And I'm committed to helping provide and share the tools for that as I've come to know them, and hopefully invite you to try exploring a little bit within yourself. And we'll be doing that very shortly as we get into the different personality types and the tools that each of us uses and the tendencies of each type, and many, many other things. Briefly, I wanted to add the other reference here, 1 John 1:9, that says, we love because God first loved us. And as applied to exploring ourselves, our capacity to be curious and to love and accept ourselves comes from the potent and all-consuming love and acceptance that God has in his nature. Anything that's in God's nature, we have access to. As that verse implies, that we love because God first loved us. Apply that to any attribute. Apply that to curiosity or acceptance or anything, really. And what this verse communicates to me in this context of personality and identity, and hopefully the antidote to self-rejection and fear, is that nothing's off limits for you. If you walk with God and you allow yourself to be filled with that love and that acceptance, there's nowhere that you cannot go that will not be transformed into something better, because he walks with you and because his love is that present and that powerful. Anyway, that's the introduction for the one half of the conversation, which is the struggles with Christian life as it comes to self-rejection, which is a true spiritual epidemic, I believe. So anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you guys in the next video where we talk about the secular side and the issues that our culture has created apart from the Christian community. So thanks again for tuning in, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.